We have your screen. Yes, now we have your
We-
presentation.
Okay, great. I think it was my fault then. Sorry about that.
Well,
Technology issues. All right. Well, thank you, Hutch. I appreciate the invitation. It's an honor to speak to you today. I'm sure I will be the most unusual speech of the day. Most of the others, I'm sure, will be targeted toward your specific records management topics, but mine will be a little bit different. Speaking of the new normal, this feels like the old normal. Me speaking to a bunch of people on Zoom, most of whom don't have their cameras on. This feels exactly like what we lived through for about a year or so. Feels like old times. So I'm going to talk about educational trends, but really it's more about the students because exactly as Hutch mentioned, you're going to be hiring these students at some point soon, and I think there's some interesting things that are going on. So let me at least give you a quick background about me and our program, not because I or the program is the focus of this talk, but because I want you to understand where I'm coming from. So this will be very brief. So I've worked at the university, Bloomsburg University, for 30 years. All of my degrees are in mathematics. So for the first half of my career, I was happily teaching mathematics courses from the lowest to the highest and enjoying myself immensely every single day. At some point, Bloomsburg decided to investigate whether this whole digital forensics area was a reasonable academic area for us. And I guess, raised my hand one day and said, sure, I'll go investigate that. And then when we decided to investigate further, I raised my hand again. And then when they said, who wants to go to training, I raised my hand again. And here we are a bunch of years later. So I've been involved in the digital forensics program since before it was an idea. I think I have a good finger on the pulse of what's going on in our program, and I interact with our students quite a lot. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea about that. I am also a practicing digital forensics person. I've worked for other companies. I have my own company, and I do forensics nearly every day. Have several active cases right now. I've testified in court. And so I feel like I have my finger on that world as well. And that obviously informs, what we teach in class. I'm also probably the go-to person for internships and jobs. When a student wants advice about that or needs a connection, I'm usually the one who does that. When an external company calls us, I'm usually the contact person. So I say all this only so that you know kind of where I'm coming from. Sorry about that. I clicked to get rid of another program and lost control here. The program itself was formally started in 2006. So that was the first year that a student could come to Bloomsburg and say, I want to major in digital forensics. So we've been doing this for a little while now, which again gives us some long-term insight into the job market and how things go. It's a Bachelor of Science degree. It's 4 years. And in our proposal back in 2005, we thought that maybe someday, if we were very lucky, we might have as many as 50 majors. We had 50 majors, I think, the second year, and it's just kind of grown from there. So we have about 300 majors right now. Our program has been declared a Center of Academic Excellence by the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security. That creates some interesting opportunities for us. We have grant opportunities and scholarship opportunities for the students that wouldn't be available to us otherwise. So that's very exciting. We're proud of that, and we believe it serves our students very well. Students graduate and all get jobs. As you know, we have a deficit supply demand issue in our industry, and so these tech degrees are in very high demand. So students will go into law enforcement, the corporate world, the government world, the intelligence community, incident response, kind of a little bit of everything. And hopefully maybe in the future, maybe more of them will go into records management. Well, we should have a talk about that. So having said all that, here's a giant disclaimer. So my experiences with Bloomsburg University only. I can't speak about the students from any other university. I only know my students. I did not do any sort of fancy analysis to prepare this talk. I didn't give out a formal survey. I didn't do any statistical analysis. I didn't, I didn't send this through the IRB and get it approved. I'm literally giving you anecdotal evidence from the students that I speak to at the university. But again, I've been doing that for at least 16 years. So I feel like there's at least probably some truth to it, but take some things with a grain of salt, obviously, as well. And I am not formally speaking for Bloomsburg University, the institution today. I'm speaking to you just as me. So I just need you to know that as well. All right, so let's talk about this stuff. So I've broken it into 3 categories, and the first category is about the students themselves. So what are they like these days? How are things different? And I guess, you know, when you talk to people, you get the kind of stock, you know, students today don't work as hard as they used to, and, you know, they're lazier and all that stuff. I don't believe that. They're different for sure. And certainly over the years, you can see the difference, but I think that's okay. They're just not what I was when I was their age, and that's perfectly fine. So one interesting thing that I've noticed anyway is that students are really tuned into group work more. And I think this might be a result of just their high school experience. I believe that maybe it's the case that high schools kind of promote group work. And so students are really just tuned into this idea that we should all be able to work on everything together all the time, and that there are kind of no limits to that. And so for me, who came from the math side, we really stressed working individually and doing your own work and not helping anybody else. And so it's been an interesting dynamic trying to kind of set boundaries for them and let them know what I find acceptable and not acceptable. So I think in the workforce, this will end up being a good thing. They're very tuned into teamwork, right? They want to work with other people. They want to help somebody who doesn't know what's going on. They will also want help from other people when they need it. I think that's actually a healthy thing. And I think in a team environment, in a job, that's probably a great thing. Occasionally in academia, it's problematic where I still stress working alone often. And my reason for that is we have graduates who go to small local law enforcement agencies, and they are the only forensics person in that shop. I mean, they are the forensics capability of that agency. I need people to be effective by themselves. Certainly, we all reach out for help from our friends when we need it, and I think that's appropriate, but I want them to be standalone good. So again, this isn't really a problem, it's just an observation. They're very friend and team oriented, and they support each other very well. I think that's a really good thing. Students have been through a lot. And if you have a student who's school age and you've survived the COVID pandemic, you know what I'm talking about. They've been through a lot. And they dealt with it differently. Different students dealt with it differently. Obviously, some people kind of just cruised through it and it didn't seem to affect them at all. But I will tell you that I talked to more students about just kind of external pressures in life and how much they were struggling more in the past year than I ever have in the other 29 years. So something was going on, and I think we know what it was, right? The stress of COVID, the stress of everything in life being different, the isolation of not coming to campus and not being in a classroom with their friends, online classes, that was a struggle. We did that for nearly a year, and it worked well for some students and it didn't work well for some students. And I'm sure you can understand that, because I'm sure your jobs all changed and it was a pretty stressful time, and not to mention all the other things that you had going on in your life as well. So it's been a very tough year for people. We're back in person now, and we have been for almost, for the whole academic year, masked at first and not masked now. And I can tell that people are still kind of shell-shocked from the stuff that happened before. It's almost like a form of PTSD. And so I don't know for sure, and I'm not sure anybody does, what the permanent effects of this will be, but I just have to tell you that some of the students are fragile. They're really struggling still to kind of get back to normal. And as you mentioned, the new normal, it's not clear what that is for some people. So I don't know in what ways this might affect them. The stress of a new job, the stress of the interview may be more heavily on them than it would normally. And I would just ask you to be aware of that they might be in a more fragile state than they normally would be. Again, this only affects some of them. Some of them seem to have just plowed through it with no issues whatsoever. It really does affect each individual differently. Related to that, another perception that I have over the years is that students' lives outside of school are more complex than they used to be. There seems to be a lot more family issues going on and relationship issues. Many students have medical issues these days, and mental health is a big concern, I think, for many of them. I meant to look up some statistics. I don't really track this or follow it very much, but I thought I heard some statistic about what percentage of students are on medication for anxiety and mental health issues, and I didn't get a chance to look it up, but I remember seeing a number that shocked me at how high it was. So it isn't clear to me whether all of these are new things or if they're just things that we didn't used to talk about and now we do, or they didn't used to be diagnosed, but now they are. So I don't have kind of the full backstory on that, but I would certainly tell you that these things are issues. And again, I think it's just something you'll need to be aware of as companies and as hiring people, and just even your coworkers, that they often have a lot going on outside of class. And so yeah, just something to keep in mind. It definitely affects their work. It affects deadlines and things like that. And again, it's not everybody. Many students seem to have no perceived issues at all, and they just cruise through school and everything's fine. But many, many, many more talk to me now than used to, 30 years ago. Bloomsburg is what I call a blue collar campus, and I say that affectionately, not in any derogatory way. I come from a blue collar family. My mother was a secretary for the church that they belonged to. My dad worked at a power plant and did a lot of manual labor. Worked on a farm before that. Both my parents are from farming backgrounds. So I am one of those people too, so I feel like I'm allowed to talk about it. But many of our students are first generation college students. They don't have anybody else in their family who went to get an advanced degree. They don't have role models in that regard. I know when I grew up, my family wasn't friends with anyone who was a doctor, a lawyer, any kind of professional job at all. We just didn't know people like that. I'm not saying we didn't have acquaintances that were, but none of our close friends, none of the people we associated with every day were in those positions. So it definitely affects some things. And so again, just something to be aware of. What I love about our students is that they've got an amazing work ethic. They're hard workers. They understand the result of that, right? It is a pathway to success. It's a pathway to have a better life than your parents did. And so they're really hard workers. They are also sometimes procrastinators, but I think that's a universal trait that trends through everything. It's not specific to blue collar folks or white collar folks. And I'm a procrastinator too, but they work really hard and they meet the deadline and they get the work done. And they're anxious to go out and work in the real world. So I will tell you that if you take a chance on them, you're certainly going to get hard workers. On the other hand, when they show up at the interview, they may not be as polished as a student who has a background where, both parents were, parents were a doctor and a lawyer or something like that. And they've been watching their parents act in a certain way for a long period of time. So sometimes you need to take a chance on the kid who's not as polished. But,
that's the only thing that came in.
No. But has the grit to do a good job. I think we have a couple attendees who maybe have a microphone open. If we could mute, that would be helpful.
Yes, I will mute them. Trying to figure out who that is.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
You either need to put headphones on or do stairs, or I'll go downstairs. What do you want?
It's Joseph McNamee.
As you can imagine, money is a serious issue for all students, and I'm sure you're aware of that. And in particular, our students, are what I call blue collar students, are really struggling, I would say, more than most to pay for college. Most of them have to pay for at least part of it themselves, maybe all of it themselves. And so it's a consistent issue that they really work every free minute that they have that they are not in class to try to earn money to continue getting their education. And that's a tough situation. So again, most of them must work. It's not an option. Again, we have certainly a set of students that don't have to, and money is no object, but a large portion of our students do. And so it's a weird cycle that's difficult sometimes. They're spending every minute working to earn money to go to school, but because they're working every minute, they sometimes don't get the grades that they should get if they weren't, didn't have that financial burden. And so it's a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. Many of them also leave with very high debt figures. And again, I'm sure you're aware this is a national issue, not a Bloomsburg issue. And so the thing I like about them, at least the ones that I've talked to, I've had students leave with considerable debt, really couldn't, basically had $0 to start and struggled to keep up as they went through. But what I like about them is they know there's a good paying job at the end of the rainbow, right? And they're gonna take that money and put it on the debt and knock it off very quickly. And quite a few of the ones I've spoken to have really put that debt away in an extraordinarily short amount of time. So I think they're good stewards of the money once they get it. They just don't have any, ahead of time. Certainly we have a percentage of our students that do military service to pay for the tuition and things, and that works out real well for them. We are a military friendly school. We've been designated as such. And I will tell you that is more than just a name. We really are legitimately military friendly. So that's another thing to keep in mind with our military folks. I've got students who are being deployed right now to various places around the globe from the National Guard. I have another student who just got informed, he's got to go to a training and he's going to miss finals week. So we try to adapt to them. And I know the same thing would happen in the workforce, that they would need some accommodations to do their other duties. But again, these students are often among the best. They work extra hard because they know they have to, and they know that their weird schedule means they've got to just kind of bust it out and get it done. So in general, we've had extraordinarily good luck with these folks. Although they've got unusual schedules, they work real hard to make up the difference. And then the other interesting thing that's happened with the students is that they are a much more diverse group than we kind of imagined we would get in the beginning. So my department also has traditional computer science, and computer science really suffers from a lack of diversity. At least at our university, it did for many years. And so it was really tough to even see any sort of diversity at all. It was a bunch of white 18-year-old boys who were taking the major. And so when we started digital forensics, one of the interesting things we noticed was that we got a more diverse group. And for starters, it was females. Many more females than we would see in computer science. So it is not unusual now to walk into one of our classes and see 30 or 40% of the students to be female. Now, certainly you might walk into one and it might only be 10% as well, but I'm excited about the fact that at least it's not zero, right? Which it is pretty close to in computer science. So that's exciting. We've also seen students who are traditionally underrepresented in STEM fields show up. So we have a large Hispanic population of students and Black students who now take our major. And it's really exciting to see that. The classes really look like everybody on campus now, which is great. And I wish we could take some kind of credit for it and say that we initiated some special program that did this, but we literally don't know what we've done. I think honestly, it's just interest in the field. It's just it's an appealing field to many people. And I think that's really the explanation. Again, I wish we could take credit for it, but we're just excited that it's happening. The students are also diverse in their interest areas. So we have students who really are very focused on doing hardcore digital forensics and investigating hard drives and cell phones, and they want to work in law enforcement and put bad guys away. And then we have folks who want to do incident response or network forensics or, any of the other million areas that we have. And again, I think there's an opportunity here for records management. I had a discussion with Richard and Hutch about how I think there are a couple fields in our big area that are maybe a little bit undersold. And I think Ediscovery is one of them. And I think probably records management is another. And I think the perception from the students anyway is that these are less, less dramatic and less cool or less, less sexy than the others. And so we might need to educate them a bit on what makes these fields interesting. I think everybody wants a story, right? And they want to be able to tell the story like, I was working on this murder case, and I found the thing and I put the guy away. And those are great stories. But there's other work that needs to be done. So I will tell you that because we have such a diverse, group of students, there's probably a chance that there's some people that would really love this work. We just need to sell it a bit better. So hopefully ARMA is willing to come to campus sometime and give a talk. I would certainly challenge all of you, if you're willing to come and give a talk, I promise you we will arrange it and make it happen. We have a few events that I'd be happy to, I'll talk to Hutch and Richard about that would be ideal for you to come to campus and, pitch what you do. So the next section is about getting a job. So the process of getting a job. And I'm really going through that right now because of course it's a few weeks from the end of the semester and the students are all packed in my office trying to figure out, how does the interview process work and, what will I need to know and how should I act and all of that stuff. So just a few observations here. When we started, almost none of our students got an internship. We are in a rural location. There's not a lot of high-tech industry near us. And so there just wasn't an easy way for us to get internships for students. Over the years, that's changed. We've done a lot of work to reach out and we've made connections with various companies. And we now have companies call us, which is great. And so it's a bit easier now, but I still have a supply demand issue. I have many students who want an internship and I still don't have enough supply for them. So students have realized what a valuable experience that is. It gives them real world job experience and looks great on their resume. And many times, they see it as a gateway to getting a job at that company as well. I would argue it works great for the company as well. So many of our students, most of our students who do an internship get a job offer from that company. They love our students. So think of it as an extended interview process, right? You get to really try the person out for a while, see if they're good. And if they are, then you make them an offer. And if they aren't, then that's okay too. So I think the issues that we often run into given our field are that the content that we work on can sometimes be very sensitive. And by that, I mean, in law enforcement, it can be so sensitive that you don't want to expose another human to it because it's truly terrible. And especially in, a young person. And it might be sensitive content in the sense that it's sensitive records that you're keeping for a client and you don't want to, have as, you don't want extra eyeballs on them. You want less eyeballs on them. The other thing that we run into with smaller companies is internships really do cost the company something, right? You have to pull a worker off of billable hours and say, hey, can you talk to this person, mentor them, teach them what we do? And for some companies, that's just an impossibility, right? They're struggling to make ends meet as well, and they don't have the resources, they don't have the bandwidth internally to do that. So I would challenge all of you, if your company offers internships, please contact me and let me know about it. If your company doesn't, I would challenge you to ask them to see if they can find a way to do that. I promise you it will pay off in the end. And if your company says we just can't do it, maybe an offer from you to say, well, let me try to take somebody in records management, and that might be a twofold win, right? Your company can then offer an internship and you might be able to show somebody what a great job this is that they might not, have known from before. So I've got students queued up, dying to do it. We just don't have jobs for everybody. So if that's a possibility, we would certainly enjoy working with you on that in that regard. So. And now there's the part where I'll complain about some things. Students are pretty frustrated often with the job process. And so one of the things that they get real frustrated about as new graduates or about to be new graduates is the job descriptions. So many of them are searching on online databases like Indeed.com, trying to find the perfect job, who's hiring right now, what do I need to do to appeal to them? And the job titles sometimes really don't fit the job. And it's pretty frustrating for them when they find out that, the Pennsylvania State Police hire digital forensics people, but the job description says network administrator or network technician or something else that isn't what we would picture to be digital forensics. So I would just encourage companies, if you're going to advertise, make it clear what it is that you're advertising for. And then, of course, there's the other traditional problems. Every job requires 3 to 5 years of experience, every single job, even the ones that say entry level. And so it's a bit frustrating for students because, they say, well, here I am, I've been trained well for 4 years, I'm ready to go into the workforce. Yes, I need an entry level job, but it's impossible for me to already have 3 to 5 years of experience. And so this is again, not a Bloomsburg problem, this is a universal problem. My rule for them is if it says anything from 1 to 3, apply and don't worry about it. But it would be great if there were some truth in advertising. It'd be great to see jobs that say 0 years of experience required. This is a job for brand new college graduates. Because look, brand new college graduates do get hired and do work. So it's not clear why none of the job descriptions say that. The list of skills is sometimes intimidating, I would say. Students will say, I feel like I know how to do, a large portion of these things, but I certainly don't know how to do all of them. And so this idea that you want the entry-level person to have 10 programming languages, but they're also, fluent in FTK and NCase, and they also know how to do Ediscovery, and they also know about this, and they know about procedures and policies. Probably nobody knows all of that. And if they do, they might not come to work for you for the salary that's posted. So it's a struggle at this time of year. A lot of kind of despondent students saying, I'm looking for jobs, but I just don't see any that look like I can do them. And I suspect that they could do many of them. It's just that there's a mismatch between the write-up of the job and the job itself. So hopefully the industry can work toward kind of making that a more accurate description of what they really expect the person to do. I've been hearing stories about the interview process, which really does seem quite new to me. I really think there's some new formatting involved. Obviously, a lot of things are happening by Zoom now, where before, of course, you wanted the person, to be in person in your presence, and now these are kind of the common things. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the quantity of interviews. I was kind of surprised to hear how many interviews it takes at some companies to get the job. So people telling me that they had to go through 6 interviews to get the job at a company just seems shocking to me. And I don't know if that's because of these new formats, right, where the first few maybe aren't in person, and then there's a series of them that are in person. And maybe in the old days, when I was interviewing for things, everything was in person, so maybe those first 3 didn't count or something. But it's kind of a crazy process now, in my opinion. It seems to take a really long time. Yeah, it's just different than what I'm used to. The other one that really shocked me was a student came to me and said, I had 3 interviews with a company and then they told me I wasn't qualified for the job. And I was just shocked about that. It seems to me that you would want to figure that out very early on. And to me, that would be the first meeting or the second meeting at the latest. It was shocking to me that this person had been through 3 interviews, potentially with 3 different people, and then someone decided they were not qualified. It was pretty tough for the student to hear that after 3 interviews. I think they thought they were making progress, and then to be kind of cut off at that point and told, oh yeah, just kidding, none of that mattered, we really don't want you, was kind of surprising to them, and to me as well. The other pet peeve of students is the length of time to get a response about things. So students are often told, okay, you had your interview, it went well, we'll contact you in about a week. And then 3 weeks go by and no news. And so then the student's in this position where they're debating, should I contact them? I don't want to bother them, but at the same time, I want them to know I'm still interested in the job. And so there's this weird kind of zone they get into where they can't quite figure out what to do. Should I keep pestering them? Should I not? And so they often come in and talk to me, and we try to work out a reasonable amount of time to wait so they don't seem too anxious, but at the same time, to let the company know they're still very interested and want to continue the process. So those are kind of the issues around getting a job. And then once they get the job, there's some interesting observations about the work afterwards. So students today, I think, care a lot about the quality of the job environment. And one of the things I think they're looking for is a positive kind of nurturing environment, right? When you walk into your first job, it's already pretty intimidating. And I think a lot of them fear that they don't know everything yet. And of course they don't, right? I don't either. And so I have to kind of remind them that no one's expecting you to know everything on the first day. So they're really looking for environments where they can have a mentor and be kind of walked through the first couple steps so that they can kind of get a start going. And many of them are insecure about their abilities. I find this especially, it seems like every few years I get just an outstanding female student who thinks they don't know how to do anything. And it's just a really frustrating thing for me to see that. Inevitably, it's a straight A student who is spectacular, and they'll come to the office and they'll be like, oh, everyone knows more than I do. And I think, no, they don't. But they see somebody who's maybe been playing with computers longer than they have, and they feel like they get this weird perception that they don't know as much as they do. So I think many students just kind of need some confidence and need to get their feet on the ground and get started, and they need a little bit of help to do that. And I will say that my perception is that more and more companies are actually providing that very well. So that's a compliment, not a criticism at this point. But I just wanted you to know that I think that's something that many students need, is just like, hold my hand for a little bit, get me started, then you can push me on the bike and I'll try to go by myself. And I might fall over, but it'll be okay. One other interesting new thing to me that I see companies doing is investing in this idea of a rotation through many parts of the company. And the companies that I know that do this, it's about a 2-year process, which is a big investment, I will say. I appreciate that the companies are willing to do that. But they let the student rotate between 3 or 4 different areas in the company for about a 6-month period each time. And it lets the student sample multiple areas and decide where they might fit the best. It also lets those departments sample the person and decide where they might fit the best. And in the end, they have a meeting where they kind of decide, like, where do you think you belong? And then they discuss it with the various groups in the company and decide, where they think the person belongs. And I think what happens is a great match in the end, right? You're more likely to stay at a company if you feel like you're in the right spot. And I think this tries to put people in the right spot right from the start. It also gives them an appreciation of other areas of the company which they may need to interact with. And it may even provide them a contact in another department, that they may need to interact with. So I think this is all positive from my point of view. The only negative I can see for the company is they probably have to invest some money in doing this. They're not going to get probably billable hours out of that person immediately in the department that will eventually be their home department. But this is a fantastic thing. The students have really taken to it. And the best students are really excited about that idea that they're going to get to sample everything and pick. It's hard to tell what you want to do for the rest of your life, even when you're 22. So students these days, I think, are looking for flexibility. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And again, this is a complementary thing to the business world. I believe that business has realized that they can do a lot of this and that it works out real well for them too. So it doesn't really cost them anything. So everything from flexible hours. And so if you're working remote, it might mean that you get to take your kids to school before you start work, or end early to go to a ball game that you want to see with your kids or something. If you're in person, it allows people to dodge traffic, right? So I'll come in 2 hours before I know the traffic rush hits. I'll get in, I'll do my work, I'll get out early. And I think people appreciate that flexibility that business offers if they just say, look, get your work done. We don't really care when it happens, but get it done. Work from home is a big one, right? Maybe a flex situation where you're in the office 2 days a week and then you're at home 3 days a week or something like that really appeals to many people, especially I think those with young kids and families. It just makes their life easier in lots of ways, scheduling wise. Remote work is very popular right now. Students are really, some of them craving that. And I think companies have realized that it opens up the prospect of hiring, especially if you're a company that's maybe in an area that you realize that not every single person would like to move to. So I know there's a company that we work with in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's pretty cold. Not everybody wants to live in a cold environment these days. And I think what they found was that by opening it up to remote work, that they were getting people who said, yeah, I want to live where it's sunny. I want to go to the beach, but I'm happy to do that kind of work, that it opens up that person to be an employee at a place they maybe wouldn't normally go to. So that's been very appealing. We also have a set of students, not large, but we have a set of students that for whatever reason are tied to a specific geographic area. They've got a spouse who has a great job and they don't want to uproot that spouse to go get their job as well. Or they have responsibilities with aging parents or something like that, where they have to stay in a specific geographical area. So this remote work is really a godsend for them. It works out really well. And I think it's been interesting to see that happen. And I think COVID really pushed that to the forefront. Students these days, I think, are also looking for a decent work-life balance. My generation, I think, was just happy to slave away and work as hard as they had to make ends meet and get things done. And I think this group is willing to work very, very, very hard, but they also want time away. And I think that's a very reasonable request. But I think they're more likely to bring it up and care about it early on. I was just excited to get a job. I almost didn't care what the details were. I just was excited to have a job. And I think they're much more mature than I was and much more forward thinking. And they're seeing their life, in the future, and they want to make sure they have a little bit of a life outside the company as well. And last, mobility. So the idea that it seems like these days people don't necessarily stay in one company for a permanent amount of time, right? They move around a lot. And I've asked the students about this, the ones who have graduated, and they have some interesting ideas about why they think that happens. But the ability to switch jobs or switch companies, the switching companies thing just happens, right? You feel like maybe you've reached the limit at your company and you can't go any higher, and that might mean pay, it might mean job position. I'm not sure, what it means to different people, but they've told me that it's easier to just leave that company and go to another one to get the desired result, because it seems like often they run into roadblocks in their own company and they can't go any further. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you have employees that you want to keep, you might need to be flexible about, things like their pay or their job position to let them move around to continue to be happy and to grow. The thing I'll close with is there's a brain drain in Pennsylvania, right? We train people to do high-tech jobs and then they often move out of our state. And I realize that you are from many states, not just Pennsylvania. It may affect your state as well. But what's been kind of interesting to see over the 15 or 16 years we've been doing this is that students move to DC, they live their single life down there, they have a ball, they party, they work hard, they get all that done. They get married and they start to have kids. And then interestingly enough, they have this desire to kind of come back home again. And maybe it's to be close to grandparents, who maybe can do, babysitting and things like that and help, or they want to get back to family, or they want to raise their kids in a place similar to the way they grew up. And so I think there's kind of a callback almost. And so quite a few students who have moved away to the big city to do jobs have then come back to rural Pennsylvania, which has been kind of interesting to watch. So I think, yeah, we still have the brain drain problem, but I think there's an interesting cycle that brings them back again sometimes. And the remote work really has helped that a lot, right? Because if you got that great job with the company and you want to live in rural Pennsylvania, you can do that now where you really couldn't before. I thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to talk to you. It's been fun. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you have.
Hello, Scott. We have a question here.
Okay.
From Susan. They want to know, are you seeing older students looking for a second career these days, or it's typically 18 to 22-year-olds?
That's great. And I forgot to mention that on the diversity page, that indeed we do have students of all age groups. So I had a 50-something-year-old nurse quit her job at Geisinger and come and get a digital forensics degree. We've had quite a few second-degree students who have gotten a degree at one college went out and tried it and decided, I want to do something different and come back. The military folks sometimes are, are maybe not 18 to 22. So yeah, we absolutely have a population like that. And I will say that Bloomsburg's always had a population like that. We're a school that I think caters to folks like that, where maybe at, a different school they wouldn't. So yeah, absolutely. Certainly the bulk of our students are still 18 to 22, but we absolutely have a sizable set of students who are not. So absolutely.
Could your forensics program be done totally online?
It cannot. We had an online certificate for a while where you could kind of get the basics online and get a certificate, but we are so shorthanded right now. I'm sure some of you, if you've read the paper, the state system, that there's some pretty crazy things going on right now with some mergers and things. And so we're just exceptionally shorthanded and couldn't offer that if we wanted to at the moment. But it's a possibility for the future, but certainly not there right now.
Are you working with any intern programs in your school, any offsite?
When you say intern program, do you mean specific companies or do you mean?
Yes, specific companies. Somebody wanted to know about the quality of mentoring at those companies. Are you getting feedback from your students regarding mentoring? I know I thought that was a really big and a really important aspect, mentoring, because that's where you get people and keep people.
Yep. Yeah. I would say all of the feedback we've gotten has been extraordinarily positive. Almost every student I've talked to has had a fantastic internship experience. They felt like they were treated very well, got to do important, interesting work, were helped when they needed it. Absolutely. So we've had exceptionally good luck. I hope that's not just an accident. I think it's because companies care and they really want to treat those interns well, because again, every student I know who's done an internship has gotten a job offer from that company. So we've had very good luck. Yeah, so our experience has been great.
And let's see, I don't think I have any more questions in the chat.
Okay.
But I think that was really good. That was a really good perspective. So just what I said before, these are the people we're going to be hiring, the people we're looking for. And they got, the things they're expecting are things that we perhaps have just gotten used to, like the work from home aspect, the flexibility. I think they're going to be coming out in the world kind of expecting that, or having it not be a shock when they express, what they're looking for in a job. And to hear that, from an educator, I think that was really good and very interesting. And right, there are no more questions, correct? Nope, I don't have any more. Well, that was fantastic. We'd like to thank Dr. Inch for speaking with us today. And we've got 5 minutes until we get to our next subject, and that's going to be leveraging your IG program in the next new normal world. And that'll be done by Brianne All.
Excuse me, Hutch. This
Sorry.
is Kathy Lovemore. I put a question in
Oh, you did.
directly to you.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me check my chat here. Oh, look, there it is. For internships, how mobile are the students based on where they live? And are there constraints on mileage? Oh,
So it varies. We have a set of students, and this is where the financial issues kick in, right? We have a set of students who it would be very difficult for them to move far away. We have other students who are willing to do absolutely anything. So we've had students do internships in California. We have students who say, I can't go further than an hour from my house, so it's really kind of variable. If you, have the opportunity and you're willing to let me know about it, I will find you someone who wants to do it. And we also have students who live, in many, many areas. So although we're a state university, we certainly attract a large percentage of our students from the very local area that we are in. We certainly have students from New Jersey and, New York and now many other states because of this major. It's been kind of attractive, including students from other countries. So yeah, if you let me know about it, I will find you a person. That's probably not an issue.
And, oh, we do have another question also. What are the applications for digital forensics outside of law enforcement and military intelligence?
Sure. So the corporate world, internal investigations, right? You work for Coca-Cola or something like that. You have tens of thousands of employees. Somebody's going to do something dumb one day. And so somebody's going to say, hey, I looked over at Jimmy's computer and he's like on eBay all day. He's like selling stuff. I don't think he's doing his job. So somebody's going to have to come and investigate that computer and see if what the claim is true. And occasionally people do worse things than that, obviously. And then preparing for Ediscovery, right? Big companies get sued all the time. So you've got an Ediscovery component where you've got to produce emails or something like that. So law enforcement, corporate world, military intelligence, government. The government actually, the Postal Service has a computer crimes division. NASA has a computer crimes division. The State Department has digital forensics folks who travel to other countries and analyze the computers at the embassies. So it's everywhere.
And thank you. And now I think I'm correct in saying that we have no more questions, right?
Thanks so much for the opportunity, and please feel free to reach out to me directly, anyone, or through Hutch or Richard. So thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you again. That was really, really good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And right now, let's see. We are going to, we have Brianna All. She's the Senior Manager of Information Governance and Strategy and Operations at Morgan Lewis and Bacchius. Previously, Ms. All was the firm-wide record Senior Manager for Reed Smith since 2009, a position to which she was promoted after serving as record supervisor for the Pittsburgh office since 2006. Ms. All also serves as a past president of the Pittsburgh chapter of ARMA and is a founding steering committee member of the Law Information Governance Symposium. Ms. All became a CRM in December of 2014, and Ms. All received her BA in English from the Pennsylvania State University in 2001. Her MBA is from Waynesburg University and came in 2008. And let's see. Contact. And let's see. Brianne, are you available? Are you there?
I am, and hopefully you're seeing my screen now.
Let's see, I'm going to start that. I'm going to. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you should be able to see yours right now. Is everybody okay? Can you see Brianne's screen? Fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hutch, for that introduction. I did notice that you didn't put that I'm an aspiring singer, which I always put in all of my intro slides, and yet my husband makes me take that out for some reason. He doesn't agree that I should be an aspiring singer. I also put that I am a Penguins fan, and then I considered my audience and thought maybe I should strike that. And then I put it back because with the playoffs coming up, I thought maybe you would support us because we may not be in the same city, Philly, but we at least are in the same state. So in terms of the agenda today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the lessons that we learned from an IG perspective as it relates to the pandemic. How you can either implement your entire IG program or at least pieces of an IG program post-COVID, or to the extent that you already had an IG program in place, how you can improve upon it, and then how you can leverage remote working to further your IG efforts. As you heard from my background, my primary experience has been in law firms. So you'll see that most of what I have in here has a law firm flavor, but I hope for those of you who are not working in law firms, that you still get something out of it, because I appreciate we have a lot of the same, let's say, shared challenges and opportunities. So We learned a whole host of things from the pandemic, but in terms of IG, I think we learned a lot of great key points. Number one, information has to be accessible to our entire organization 24/7 across the globe. And that real estate needs are really flexible. So all of that beautiful real estate that your company may have suddenly becomes a bit of a burden when you think about the fact that most offices over the past 2 years have been one's personal residence. I know it's blurry behind me, of course. This is my home office. Yesterday I was in my, let's say, real office, and I appreciate next week I'll be complete somewhere else. So again, real estate is really just based on the position of the person presenting. If you ask someone what hybrid means for them, you are going to get multiple answers. So I actually had a conversation with a few of my colleagues at other firms, and we all said that we are in a hybrid environment. But when we said, well, what does that mean? All three of us had a different definition. So for my firm, it's 3 days in, 2 days remote. You pick the days that you're remote. The other colleague said, we have a similar cadence in terms of days, but our firm is saying Mondays and Fridays, everybody's remote. Tuesday through Thursday, everybody's in. The other colleague said, oh, hybrid for us means you come in when you need to and you stay home when you don't. So again, it's important to understand that even whatever your organization's definition of hybrid isn't necessarily the same as your customers or clients, and also your organization's definition of hybrid may be subject to change based on what's happening outside of your literal and virtual four walls. The right tool at a critical time is oh so priceless. I actually had rolled out an e-signature program at our firm at the very end of 2019. We had a few bites, but the initial response was what I would consider to be lukewarm. 6 months later, I was everybody's best friend. Everybody was using that program and saying that, it really helped them continue their particular business simply because it meant that they were able to get those very critical documents signed without having to wait for a tool to be identified, road tested, and implemented. So again, right tool, critical time, can't tell you how important that is. Automation is equally critical. I know that the prior speaker was talking about all of the challenges that certainly many of us are experiencing day to day in terms of staffing, resources, et cetera. The more that you're able to automate, the less those other challenges, less of a headache, I should say, those other challenges become. And security, of course, is critical, always has been, always will be, but it needs to be scalable, especially as your information extends to people's residences and they are coming up with ways to address client and customer needs at an unprecedented time. Companies need to be able to pivot. They need to be able to change their business model at a moment's notice, not just to be able to thrive, but to survive. And we saw that certainly in the restaurant industry, where takeout became something that if a particular restaurant didn't already have in place, it ultimately became much more of a struggle for them to get a new customer base than for those that already had that takeout model, McDonald's, Wendy's, more fast food chains, if you will. And then last but not least, if you do not have established IG policies and procedures, people will find a way to work around what you want them otherwise to do and collaborate. So how do you implement your IG program, or how do you improve upon it? The next few slides you'll see on the left-hand side, that's more for those of you who say we're at the very infancy stages of our program. We have pieces or we have nothing at all. On the right-hand side, that may be more for those of you who say we've had a policy, a program in place for many years, even prior to the pandemic, but we're looking for ways to improve upon it. So let's start with our good and great friend policy. IG policies are absolutely important to establish an understanding of how people are to work within your organization. At the bare minimum, your policies should define what a record is, where it's to be stored, how it's to be secured, the mobility and portability requirements around it. So again, speaking from a law firm perspective, we define mobility as situations where a client may elect to transition from one law firm, your law firm, to another, meaning their data goes from your organization to another organization. Appreciate that's not unique to law firms, but again, that's how we define mobility versus portability, how people are using that data, data in motion, and ultimately how that data, or if that data is allowed to be accessed outside of your infrastructure. Retention, which is self-explanatory, and then of course privacy requirements, bearing in mind that privacy requirements are not just subject to change in and of themselves, but also the ones that apply to you as your staff start working in other states or countries. So from a post-pandemic perspective, certainly you need to look at those policies you may have already had in place and think of some of the following. How do your policies work in a hybrid environment? So for example, are people able to follow your policies if, for the most part, they are working from a remote location, their home office or somewhere else? Are there new tools that you put into place during the pandemic that now need to be part of your policies and need to be governed? E-signatures, as I mentioned, was a huge, huge opportunity for those organizations that didn't already have an e-signature tool in place. But Teams, of course, and other collaboration platforms became very critical and also widely used during the pandemic. E-notary and remote notary, especially the RON solutions that ultimately skyrocketed during the pandemic. Does your organization use those? And if so, where is that data being managed? Is it part of your policies? Resources and staffing. So if you are thinking of what do you need to launch an IG program, you certainly need resources available to do things like digitization, electronic records management, physical records management, and disposition. So there are multiple different ways that people have structured their IG organization. Some have data scientists, which are phenomenal. Some rely on other parts of their larger organization to do those types of tasks. And their specific organization is really focused on the management of records themselves. After the pandemic, it is absolutely important to look at your existing organization and decide whether you need to right size. And when I say right size, I am not saying that as a nice way of avoiding the term downsizing. I truly mean right size. It could be that you can or need to or should reduce staffing as it relates to certain tasks that are no longer needed. Maybe during the pandemic, you had a significant transition to digital records and you have a very large, let's say, traditional record staff that maybe you just don't need that number anymore. And it's unfortunate, but it may be the case. Alternatively, you may find that you need more staff, especially in offices that have more individuals working from them. I believe that the last speaker had mentioned this idea of people going to DC and then coming back to Pennsylvania. I know in my organization, the concept of living in a lower cost city, such as Pittsburgh, as opposed to New York, or even Philly for that matter, was very attractive to certain attorneys, or they moved back to Pittsburgh simply because they were born and raised here and they had family here. So where before the pandemic, we were at a certain number of attorneys, we now have more attorneys. So it may mean that we have to reconsider how many individuals we need from an IG perspective based out of our Pittsburgh office. Transitioning of existing roles is also important. Going back to that example I mentioned, that maybe you had quite a bit of people focused on one aspect of your records program. So again, just to use an example, maybe focused more on traditional records management, storage, retrieval, what have you. Now, the flavor, the cultural flavor of your firm for programs such as electronic records management, not just in terms of digitization, but also making sure that records that are already inherently electronic are stored in the appropriate repositories. Maybe the flavor of that for your organization is much better than it was prior to the pandemic. So for those resources that you have doing one task, it may be an opportunity for them instead to do something different that adds more value to your organization. And of course, with that would be greater skills development, not just in terms of technology, especially new technology that was procured and used during the pandemic, but also opportunities for them to learn the impacts of certain regulations and other external factors on your IG program. As I mentioned earlier, privacy laws, especially in situations where your firewalls have now extended to a much larger aspect of the country than they were initially. And then, of course, leveraging existing resources from COVID. And by that, I mean, not necessarily people that were part of your IG or records organization, but perhaps individuals within your company that have a little bit more free time, shall we say, or bandwidth, simply because their core role isn't required as much right now. And I think of people who may have been more reliant on face-to-face interactions that are now being done virtually. Is it an opportunity to use those particular resources as a means to beef up what you're able to provide from an IG perspective without costing your company additional money in terms of recruitment, salary, what have you? Digitization. So certainly from a bare minimum, a digitization program, in order to be successful and not cost a significant amount of money to your company, is coming up with a criteria in terms of when there is a cutoff. So for us, we certainly have no desire to go back many, many years and digitize documents that have been for closed matters or are close to their disposition eligibility. But we are looking to digitize documents that are for more active matters or for situations in which the retention period is significantly longer. So we have those particular pieces in our program, as should you, but we also look for and have scanning software that makes the process much easier to do, especially because we use a document management system, much like other law firms, to store our official matter record. In terms of post-pandemic, we are looking at other programs that were put in place during the past 2 years, including the mail scanning that had been done by our office services department as a means to say, well, if these documents are already being digitized as they come in the door, and there is no plans to cease that mail scanning program, even as our return to office measures begin to increase, there's an opportunity for us to incorporate that as part of our larger records digitization program and work with the recipients of that mail to say, okay, that's already scanned to you. Number one, can we get rid of the physical mailing legally? And then two, that digitized mail, where does it need to be stored if it is part of our either matter record or administrative record? And then, of course, using digitization as a service for people not to have to come into the office. So during the pandemic, we had a few attorneys who really needed to come in or wanted to come in because they had certain files that were sitting on their desk. We, from an IG perspective, said, rather than you coming in, why don't we digitize your matter record and then it's accessible to you right from your home? Attorneys were very, very happy with that opportunity, but that is something that we are also not ceasing as we go back into the office. So we know that there are attorneys who still intend to work from home, even if they're coming in a little bit more. So why not have your records accessible to you wherever you are, assuming they are not already electronic? So again, this is something that we continue to offer our attorneys as a means to say, rather than having to rely on the paper at all, regardless of what the outside world looks like, let's digitize it so that in the event you need it and you aren't within the office, you don't have to wait. Shredding. So most people on this call, I would suspect, already have a shredding program. You probably have a shredding vendor. They came a certain period of time, whether it be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly. Maybe that waned a little bit during the pandemic. Maybe it's starting to come back as people go back into the office. Maybe even have communications that have been sent out, or even shred all programs. And when I say shred all, I mean the ones that the programs that ultimately say anything that is getting discarded, assuming it's not a toiletry product, is going into your shred bin. We have a shred all program in place, and admittedly, we had a few people who thought that meant we were bursting through their doors and doing a large sweep off their desk. In some situations, it would be great to do that, but no, what we really meant was anything that was being discarded was ultimately placed in the shred bin. So after the pandemic, residential shredding has become something that is still very much a desire for people as they work from home and continue to print. We are certainly looking for opportunities to reduce printing whenever possible, not just for IG benefits, but also just environmental sustainability, cost reduction, security and risk mitigation. But ultimately, we do have people who still like their paper. So to that end, the residential shredding programs that we had in place during the pandemic will likely be something we continue to have in place as people work from their, again, personal residence. We are looking for opportunities, as should you, to review how often shredding needs to happen within your organization. I can tell you, for those of you who haven't yet formally reopened, prepare in advance that as people start to come in, they will come in with this great gusto to get rid of everything that's been collecting dust on their desk for the past 2 years. And then hopefully you start to see people back off and rely on what is already natively digital, as opposed to, again, continuing to print, and then shred. Looking for opportunities to extend your shredding services beyond just the paper. So again, as people have found other means or have been approved through other means to have content on more portable media, shall we say, you absolutely want to make sure that that's incorporated within your program. And to the extent that you didn't have shred all in effect before because the cost was perhaps too much, consider implementing it now, knowing that, again, the amount that people are printing hopefully is less and less, especially within the literal four walls of your building. Offsite storage, much like shredding, I would be shocked if all of you didn't have an offsite storage program. Now, I appreciate vendor agnostic, et cetera. It may be that you were always looking for ways, even before the pandemic, to only use that program when absolutely necessary. So identifying opportunities for people to know when something should go to offsite storage versus when it should be maintained digitally, returned back to your client or customer, things of that nature. Now, after the pandemic, it could be that in some situations, your offsite storage program increases. And by that, I mean in situations where you have people who say, you know what, we want to get out of this very expensive real estate, but we've got a lot of paper. How can we make this happen quickly? It may be that your offsite storage is a solution, not the ideal solution, but certainly more cost effective than the expensive real estate that you currently occupy in a more expensive city. Looking for opportunities, of course, always to reduce offsite storage through digitization and disposition, but looking for potential services that your offsite storage vendor offers, such as the scan on demand programs. based on, of course, the security and risk flavor of your organization. And then establishing the scope of what should be archived in offsite storage versus not, especially as some of your groups or subgroups within your company may have had workflows and been reliant on, let's say, governing bodies who used to operate in more a paper-based format and now post-pandemic are in a more digital format, such that perhaps what was permissible prior to the pandemic as something for offsite storage should now be a candidate for digitization or native electronic record. Audits and accountability, making sure that you have your shredding audits in place, that the proper documents are being put in the shredding receptacle versus a recycling receptacle. Inventory audits, knowing what you have. And then out-perm audits. This is something that we do to make sure that we don't pay for offsite storage for boxes that aren't going back. And then, of course, after the pandemic, we have incorporated a lot of audits as it relates to making sure we account for everything that people are bringing back in the office, but also making sure that they have done the appropriate procedures as it relates to the storage of electronic content in the right repository. Disposition, policies, schedules, workflows, resources. Again, as records practitioners, I know everybody is familiar with that. From a post-pandemic perspective, I can tell you that we have looked for opportunities to really extend our disposition team to include resources that weren't as heavily involved with the process to begin with. Our essential records personnel, for example, those who are in the office every single day, are much more involved in the retrieval, review, and subsequent disposition of materials. Whereas prior to the pandemic, we heavily relied on our established disposition team to do the program essentially soup to nuts. And then electronic signatures, looking for a tool. There are many tools out there, several that are considered kind of best of breed. Looking for opportunities to make sure your organization knows when they can use that tool versus not. But afterwards, making sure you also remind them that that tool still remains in place, and that as your organization presumably remains in a virtual format to some extent, that you still offer that particular software for them as well. So those are just some examples of what you can offer your organization as it relates to either implementing a program or improving your program. So the next question really is, how do you leverage remote working to further your information governance efforts? And there's a whole host of ways that you can do that. But the first thing I would suggest doing is promoting yourself. Where can you pat yourself on the back? For those of you who may have seen the show Will and Grace, and I'm talking about the original Will and Grace, not the reboot, Debbie Reynolds played the one character, Grace's mother. And whenever something would happen that Debbie Reynolds predicted, she would do an I told you so dance. So she would go, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. So it's really cute, look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But in 2019, we had gone around promoting information governance to all of our offices, the importance of having access to content, even if you were not working within the four walls of your office. And we had some people who embraced it right away, and others who looked at us thinking, that'll never happen. Well, of course, during the pandemic, certainly we would never, ever, ever have wanted that particular situation to happen. But as it relates to remote work, it was, look, this is why we told you this is important. This is why you don't want to rely on things that you can't have access to at your virtual fingertips. So with that in mind, I would say take a moment to celebrate and promote the fuse. What did you already have in place? What policies were already established in terms of how people were expected to work that were able to be scalable to them working from their home offices for 2 years? Did you already have a digitization program in place such that information was already accessible to individuals as they work from home? Did you already have an e-signature tool such that you had that day one, as opposed to having to wait until you were able to identify a vendor, procure a vendor, implement, et cetera, et cetera? Did you already have collaboration tools? And to the extent that you did, were they already properly governed? Meaning that people have a good understanding of how they were to use that tool, what information could be stored in that particular tool versus not, or what they were expected to do if they were receiving certain information through that tool that wasn't in your system of record. Staffing. Did you already have a staffing model in place that allowed you to be flexible as it relates to the services that you were able to offer your core internal customers? How was your team able to pivot? Was the paper to digital transition already in place for many years such that this was just kind of part of what you were already planning to do or how you already operated, or was this brand new? Maybe you already had policies that established the electronic record as the official record, meaning that people weren't printing that much to begin with. Maybe you already had IG policies and processes in place that accounted for situations in which people weren't going to be in the office to do certain tasks. And that's all wonderful because, again, it meant that March 2020 was not as much of an impact to your organization because of what you already put into place. What were new remote working processes that were already baked into your culture beyond what I just mentioned? E-signatures, of course, as I said, as my own example, really helped us because we had already introduced the flavor of having those tools available such that it wasn't people, sitting around scratching their heads thinking, what are we supposed to do now? Where did client service not get impacted? Where did your clients, and when I say clients, I mean both external and internal, say you didn't miss a beat? And that was so important for us because we rely so heavily on you. So make sure that you celebrate internally within your team, pat yourself on your shoulder, but also make sure that those who are at the senior leadership level, to whatever extent you're able to get in front of them, are aware of the fact that, hey, this is why we had this in place, and look how we were able to quickly adapt and be flexible so that you didn't have to worry about us. You were able to worry about those other situations that, quite frankly, could not have been planned for. At the same time, you can't pat yourself on the back without also taking the time to acknowledge where things weren't as wonderful as they could have been. So acknowledging the adults. Where did client service get impacted? Where were you not as flexible as you could have otherwise been had you had a policy, technology, or process already in place? Where did you have to scramble to come up with new processes or workaround processes? Where was there scramble technology? I had never heard this term before, but I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago and heard this. So the scramble technology, meaning that technology that perhaps didn't go through that much more ideal vetting process within your organization, but one that just had to happen very, very quickly in order for your company to continue to service the needs of whatever industry you're in. Where were resources impacted? Where did you have staff that potentially were furloughed because you didn't really have any opportunities to have them do something else that would have helped be a benefit to your organization during a remote working structure? Where was paper relied on? Again, in terms of culturally, I know we've heard the terms paper light, paperless for many, many years. I think the proof was really in the pandemic pudding in terms of whether people actually acted and operated within a paperless or paper light mindset. And lastly, where were the pain points, both from a departmental perspective, an internal perspective? Where were your internal customers feeling the pinch? Where were your external customers feeling the pinch? And I can tell you that even though it's the last bullet, it's certainly the most critical in terms of selling your IG program, because if you can tie some solution that you would have been able to offer to the pain point of those who help make your company profitable, you have as much as sign that check that you need in order for that particular technology, person, process, what have you, to be in place. So it's important to be prepared for the next normal. I know new normal became a very overused term. Next normal, I think now is starting to become a more overused term, but the reality is there will be no such thing as a new normal or next normal. It will constantly be changing. The pandemic is just one example of how your organizational structure can change at a moment's notice, but certainly it's not the only way that your organization can get impacted. So be prepared. Think about it from a remote working perspective. Know that there may be times where you've got departments that are in all the time, or they're working in that hybrid, whatever hybrid means to that particular organization. Know that there are going to be potential all-in days, and use those opportunities to really have those face-to-face interactions to the extent that you need to be face-to-face with somebody as opposed to Zoom or Teams or what have you. Think about the fact that geography is really expanding for your organization on a daily basis. Especially as your organization allows people to work in cities or states or countries that you don't necessarily at present have a home base in, or even a brick and mortar location in. So it's certainly important to understand that you not just have to worry about things like applicable privacy laws, but also making sure that you remain connected with those individuals in terms of this is how you are to store our organization's records, and what that means as it relates to them not following the policies and processes that they were expected to follow when they were in the office 5 days a week. If it ain't broke, don't get rid of it. So again, when you think of tools that may have been put in place during the pandemic that have ultimately allowed your organization to be much more flexible in terms of where they work, how they access information, how they service client and customer needs, don't look at ways to sunset those as the pandemic starts to wane. Again, those particular tools have already shown their abilities and benefits to make you a much more versatile and adaptable firm or organization. By all means, make sure that you continue to promote those tools, even if you have to promote them via different means. And as I mentioned, make sure you let people know how things have gotten better or how they could be better through your IG organization and program. This is the benefit that you provided pre-2020. This is the benefit that you were able to provide 2020 to 2022-ish. And then not knowing what 2022, 2023 and beyond will look like for the world, the organization, anything. Look for opportunities to say, these are the ways that we can be adaptable and prepared for whatever our next situation is. And also ensure that your team is aware of the fact that they play a critical part in making that benefit remain in place. So, ensure that your team is acting as salespeople for your program as opposed to just soldiers under you as the main leader. Also ensure that people are aware of the fact that records certainly will change based on what expectations they have and how they are relying on information to be delivered to them. So it should always be a two-way conversation. Make sure that they know you are always willing and ready to hear how you can make their access to information much more accessible and beneficial than it may have been in the past. So for those of you who just listened to me go on for the past roughly 40 minutes and are saying, that's all well and good, but how else can I measure the program beyond what the pandemic may have taught us? Certainly know that there's other opportunities. The maturity models that are available, certainly you have an opportunity to say this is where we are versus this is where we could be. Using surveys that may already be sent out in your organization in terms of how different teams are doing, but potentially new surveys in terms of what does our new world look like, what would really be helpful for you as you continue to service our clients and customers. Looking for metrics to say this is where we really need to focus our attention and effort, where, for example, our physical records still being created on a much more significant level than otherwise should be, and where there are opportunities for electronic records management practices, digitization processes, staffing, what have you. Calculate, of course, the cost savings that you have in terms of the reduction of inefficient efforts and processes, but also make sure that you're calculating the efficiencies. How much more accessible is data and information in situations where somebody should have access to that information? And where could it be with new tool, new technology, new process, what have you? So that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, yes, we have lots of questions.
Oh, okay.
Let me start. How do you deal with attorneys storing records and work products outside your document management system, especially third-party cloud storage providers such as Google Drive or Box?
So in terms of policies, absolutely all of that should be baked into your policy in terms of where people are allowed to store data versus not. To the extent that you are aware of those repositories existing, I would make sure that you work with your compliance team to have conversations with that respective attorney to make sure that he, she, or they is aware of where that data ultimately needs to be stored when the matter concludes. And that's assuming, of course, that that data is allowed to be stored in that particular repository during the course of the matter, meaning that there's been an agreed upon, or a mutual understanding, let's say, between your firm and the client that that particular repository is to be used during the course of the active matter. Providing training is certainly important, especially to those who provide assistance to that attorney, but also having your own staff trained to work with that attorney to get that information out of that particular repository into the appropriate one. So as an example, we do have one particular client who requires their matter team to use a particular repository. We are aware of that, and we work with that attorney to ensure that as that matter or those matters close, that the information is being moved out of that repository into our own DMS to the extent that it needs to be, and that the other material is either being managed by the client or being deleted if it's no longer required to be retained legally.
Great. Did Morgan Lewis have the manpower to offer digitization to the attorneys at the beginning of the pandemic, or did you have to move resources around to accomplish that?
So we did have the resources in terms of our larger roadmap was always to have our traditional record staff transition to more of a digitization program, meaning those who handle the physical records, indexing of physical record storage retrieval, ultimately that their responsibilities would slowly transition to more digitization. Admittedly, the pandemic fast-tracked that. It's funny, we had implemented a digitization program in 6 offices prior to 2020. And we were doing it on an office by office basis, again, very slow and steady. And then it was, here it is, the digitization programs available for everybody, which actually worked out pretty well because it gave us the opportunity to do larger training for our essential personnel in terms of the technology that we had available, the expectations of what were we to do after a document had been digitized, but also it allowed us to really market the digitization program through a few different ways. So prior to the pandemic, we said, here's a digitization program. This is what we're going to be doing with your records, which to some extent people acknowledged and understood, but kind of did what they were always doing. We called it a digital workplace, meaning we use the IG and digital to really kind of bold IG practices to say, hey, Joe or Jane, I know you were planning on getting in your car and coming in to get something. Don't. We can digitize it for you. So in some ways, we were able to make it more a scan on demand service as well, which it sounds silly because it's all under the digitization umbrella, but we were able to train our team members in those kind of one-off situations to understand when the larger program was rolled out, how they needed to do the process soup to nuts, including quality assurance, what have you.
I like the IG inside digital. That's a good one. I like that. When your IG staff receives a request to produce offsite physical records, do you reply something like, are you sure what you need doesn't exist digitally? Or do you just go ahead and recall the requested physical records?
We do. And I know I mentioned a little bit ago about having your team be salespeople rather than soldiers. That is a primary example of what I'm talking about. We have trained our team, regardless of what their role is, to think proactively. So to the question, if somebody says, can you retrieve XYZ file from offsite? We have the records team doing searches within the DMS to say, is this what you're looking for? Because I found it here. And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, yes, it is. To that situation where it isn't, and no, I need the file. It's okay, rather than us delivering the physical file to you, when it comes in, do you mind us digitizing it? And then you can have it accessible through the DMS. For the most part, that has actually been also well received. In some situations, there's still that urgency that people say, no, I need the physical file. And we've been able to address that too by saying, okay, we'll deliver that, but once you're done, we're going to digitize it so that you have it accessible electronically going forward. So that's a big, long way of saying we do that proactive communication, but that communication is being done by all levels of our team, not just at a managerial or director level, but from everybody so that we all are saying the same message.
Got it. And I have a question for me personally related to that. If you have a bunch of boxes that were stored offsite that have no information about what the contents are, the sensitivity, all you know is the age that the box was put into inventory. I've been recommending that we destroy the box because you couldn't possibly know the value of the box, and there are far too many that you would bring back to actually look at the contents of what's in the box. Have you personally experienced that, and what have you done in order to address that?
So we have experienced that, especially for boxes that were created multiple years ago. We are a much more, from a risk perspective, conservative organization, such that we have been calling them back to really identify what the materials are and get them indexed in our system. I'm not saying you absolutely should do that. I'm saying that's based on the risk flavor of our own organization. Certainly, I have worked in and I'm aware of other organizations that say, I think it's defensible for us to not have to go through that exercise and to get rid of it. So I would suggest work with your general counsel's office, explain the situation, and get their guidance as to what they are willing to sign off on in terms of that process.
Great, thank you. Another question. What risks would using personal devices to hosting company tools in a post-pandemic transformation world? How might a BYOB policy address it?
So, good question. By all means, to the extent that your organization has a containerized solution, I think it's really important to work to ensure that your policies establish the fact that that containerized solution and the applications approved by your organization are the only ones that should be storing data related to your internal and external matters. I know some tools, quite frankly, already have that baked into place where you can't move data in and out or even copy data in and out of those particular applications, which is great. But at a high level, absolutely, mobility should be baked. I'm sorry, your BYOD program should be baked into your IG policy, but also ensuring that people are aware of the fact that those solutions, to the extent that your organization offers them, are already in place to allow them to work from their mobile devices while still adhering to the firm's security, privacy, and other restrictions.
Okay, great. That's it for the questions that were submitted. I don't know if anyone else has any questions, if they want to ask verbally, or Hutch, I would turn it back over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. Those were great questions, and Brianne, that was fantastic. I think what I really like, what hit me there, I love the salesperson versus soldier. I think that was a really good term, really good description, and that's what I like to have for my record people also, to really try to get people to use the tools that we have, and because we are moving away from paper, that is true. So I think that was really informative. And once again, thank you very much. We're now going to take a break and we're going to reconvene at 10:45. And I would like for you to, once again, send your questions to Suzanne. She'll be taking the questions for our next topic. That's topic number 2, information governance benchmarking. So please send your questions to Suzanne, and we will reconvene at 10:45. Thank you.